What's up, universe? Elliot from Starforge Systems here. Next to me is the Sentinel PC, and I want to talk to you about what's in the system, why it's in there, and what you can expect from its performance. Let's get right into it. The Sentinel is built to empower gamers on their rise to the top. Featuring an RTX 4070 Ti from NVIDIA, it's intended to maximize frame rates to ensure you top frag lobby after lobby after lobby. The custom RGB plate, bearing the Sentinel's logo, and branded artwork wrapping an already gorgeous Lian 011 Evo makes the system look as good as it performs. Topped off with sleeved cables from CableMod and a suite of FC120 fans, this system is sure to be eye-catching while you wait for the rest of your team to buy. We've built the system around a Z790 Tomahawk motherboard from MSI. Its Wi-Fi 6E is enough to minimize latency, but just in case, it comes with a standard 2.5 gig Ethernet port. For memory, we use two aRGB DIMMs of 6,000 megatransfer per second RAM from Teamgroup for 32 gigabytes in total. In its socket, we've placed an Intel Core i5-13600K that performs utterly spectacularly. This 14-core processor is a mid-range beast. To keep it cool, we've put it under a Deepcool LS720 AIO. 360 millimeters of radiator is more than enough for this 125-watt CPU. To supply the system with its power, we've elected to go with an 850-watt PSU from MSI. The A850G PCIe 5.0 power supply leaves plenty of room for future upgrades, while having tons of headroom for highly efficient power delivery. Finally, a terabyte of storage in the form of the Teamgroup Z44A5 PCIe 4.0 NVMe SSD should ensure that your games load lightning fast. The grind to Immortal is brutal, so when it's time to GG go next, you're not stuck waiting for a long load time. Now for some game tests. Check out the description below for our testing methodology, and remember that all tests are done on standardized systems, so you know exactly what to expect.
Kicking things off with Forza Horizon 5 at 1080p, we saw 177 rendered frames with actually displayed frames at 150 FPS average. The difference here is due to the passive responsibilities from the GPU to the CPU and vice versa. Turning on frame generation in the form of DLSS 3, 1080p rendered frames came down to 169 FPS on average, but due to frame generation, the number of frames that make it to the monitor came up over 65% to 248 frames per second average. Moving back to native resolutions, the Sentinel PC averaged 160 FPS at 1440p in the GPU render, totaling 139 frames per second in gameplay. And at 4K, we see a 109 FPS average in what makes it to the monitor, while the GPU renders just over that, 115 frames per second average. Moving on to Assassin's Creed Valhalla, the Sentinel PC ran at 166 frames per second average at 1080p. At 1440p, we saw the game run 133 frames per second average using pre-configured ultra settings. And finally, at 4K, the Sentinel PC ran at 80 FPS average, moving through Assassin's Creed's in-game benchmark. Far Cry 6 is next. At 1080p with the HD texture pack enabled, we saw 147 frames per second average. At 1440p, the game ran at 140 frames per second average. Finally, at 4K, Far Cry 6 ran at 88 frames per second average. Astute viewers will notice that this is an improvement over the similarly spec'd Voyager Creator benchmarks. These improvements are relatively small, but are almost definitely due to improvements in both drivers from NVIDIA as well as game updates from the developer. In Rainbow Six Siege, 1080p frame rates sit at 484 frames per second average. Given that lows are over 400 frames per second, it's safe to say this game will run smoothly. At 1440p, we see nearly identical performance, 484 frames per second average. Highs have dropped the smallest bit here, but dropping 3 frames per second average falls within variance even after 5 total test passes per resolution. And finally, at 4K, we see 10 whole frames per second less than 1080p, 474 frames per second average using the HD texture pack. Jumping into our benchmarks of Cyberpunk 2077, the Sentinel PC ran at 153 frames per second average at 1080p. At 1440p, we saw a perfectly square 100 frames per second average. Shifting to 4K, we're reminded just how demanding this game is. 48 frames per second average at native resolution. Driver improvements have helped, but this game is still quite demanding. Turning on DLSS with frame generation, frame rates improved more than 80% to 88 frames per second average. Trying out the path tracing technology preview, visual fidelity is quite impressive, but the game does drop to 56 frames per second average. We still use DLSS 3.0 here. Finally, Modern Warfare 2. At 1080p, average frame rate sits at 175 FPS, with 5% lows sitting at 130 FPS and 1% lows at 106 frames per second average. .1440p yields still consistent, playable frame rates. 129 frames per second average with 5% lows dipping to 95 FPS and 1% lows still at 73 frames per second. Native 4K Extreme does start to show room for improvement. While the average sits at 77 FPS, 5% lows are at 55 frames per second and 1% lows are down to 39 frames per second. Turning on DLSS, we see much better 4K performance. 136 FPS average with 5% lows at 104 FPS and 1% lows at a much more comfortable 90 FPS.
That just about does it for the Sentinel PC. Built for Valorant enthusiasts who want to support their favorite team while enjoying a fantastic gaming experience, all on a stream-worthy showpiece, we're thrilled to offer this system. It won't make your aim any better, and it won't keep your teammates from auto-locking jet, but it will make sure that you don't miss a single frame when the spike explodes and your team gets swept. For yours, check out StarforgeSystems.com and be sure to swing by our Twitch live streams over at twitch.tv/StarforgeSystems. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the Forge.